Well, welcome to our July ProCritique. It's great to have everybody here, and I'm with Alli Prince. My name is Brad Pauquette. We're going to be talking about 4 short stories that have been submitted by members of our community tonight. So, first, and I'll probably say this a million times tonight because it deserves to be said, just want to applaud those members that have submitted a story for review. That takes real guts, and also it is a service to the community. We share all the stories with you ahead of time, so if you haven't looked at the stories, if you're listening to the recording, go to the website, download the stories, read them, critique them yourself before you listen, and then you can compare your critique to our critique and see if you're noticing the same things or not. And that's a really tremendous way to grow. And so we provide those stories to you not because we want to embarrass the authors or we just think it'd be fun if you tore them up or something, but we provide those so that you can engage with the material in that way so that you can grow as a writer. So those folks that are submitting their stories for consideration for us to critique really are doing a tremendous service in providing real life examples that we can talk about, because chances are some of the mistakes that we'll see in the stories tonight are the same mistakes that you might be making. And so, give these guys a round of applause. If you see them out somewhere, buy them a cup of coffee because they took one for the team and you got to learn the lesson without putting your story out there. So with that, Alli, will you pray us in?
Absolutely.
Cool.
Heavenly Father, God, I just thank you so much for these brave authors that have put their stories up for critique, God. That takes so much guts, Lord. I ask that you would bless them in that, Lord, that you would help give them inspiration as we, just give the critiques for these stories, to give them ideas on how to continue to improve their work and their writing, God. Mm-hmm. I ask that this would be a blessing, Lord, and I ask that they would be encouraged today, God. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Alli. So I am Brad Pauquette. I'm the director of the company. I started this ministry 7 years ago, and we originally called it the School of Kingdom Writers, and then later it would eventually become the company. But it's been the same mission, the same idea throughout. And before starting this, I worked for about 10 years in the publishing industry, primarily doing developmental editing and working as a coach to new authors. So helping people write their best work and release their books in the best way possible. And I found a fair amount of success doing that. And about 10 years in, I felt God calling me to full-time ministry, and I'd love to tell the long version sometimes, but the short version is now we end up here. So about a year ago, I released my book, The Novel Matrix, which we'll draw on tonight, a little bit as we talk about these stories. So that's a great resource. It draws on my experience in the publishing industry, and there are certain things when you're a consultant, and no matter what kind of consultant you are, you can ask another consultant, whether they're a banking consultant or a business consultant or whatever, they'll tell you that there are some things that you just end up telling everybody, right? You give the same lessons, the same spiel to everybody to help them improve before you can even really get started. And the Novel Matrix is really those things in my case. These are the things that I really ended up going over with everybody about their stories and about their books. And so there's definitely more to writing than what you find in the Novel Matrix, but this is the baseline that kind of gets us all on the same page, gets us pointed in the right direction. So that's me, and I'm here with Alli Prince, who is one of our first graduates from the company's full-time apprenticeship program, and she now hangs out with us. We can't get her to leave, actually. But she's now, she's been an intern for the past year. That's what we called her. But she's now transitioning into a business administrative position. So she'll do that part-time in addition to her personal writing, with which she is, did I say you're a best-selling author?
You have not yet.
With which she is also a best-selling author now. So, Alli, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Alli Prince. You kind of stole my thunder. I was going to say that I was a best-selling author twice now.
I thought maybe you were too humble to say that, and so I should help you introduce it.
But I have been doing nothing but studying story for the past 3 years now.
That's cool. Did you notice my humble brag was I was like, you're a best-selling author also? Just in case anybody
I did
missed
not
it,
notice that. So it's good that you mentioned
that I was as well.
It's good that you brought that up because that went under the radar for me.
All right. So you love story. You have a book. Tell me about your book.
My book is Copper Lies. It's a YA steampunk fantasy about the ward of an esteemed scientist accidentally creating a mechanical dragon and setting it loose on the town.
Awesome. So we were at Realm Makers this weekend, and Alli and some of our other authors here were right at home. I was not so much. I loved being there. I loved meeting everybody and everything, but I wouldn't consider myself. I don't own any costumes. Let's just leave it there. And I don't own any medieval costumes. I don't own any wizard costumes or anything like that. So,
I mean, you could if you really wanted to.
I asked Melissa when we got back if I should get a wizard costume, if I could get.
Did she
a
laugh
wizard.
at you?
No, but she didn't go for it.
Hard veto.
Yeah, hard veto.
That's okay.
on
I
that
don't
one.
actually own any wizard costumes either,
Wow.
but I do have some strange earrings, so I guess that helped me fit in with the crowd.
That works. That works. And of course, we're going to talk about these 4 short stories tonight. I commend the authors that have submitted them. And I'm sure you guys can relate that part of the problem that we face as authors is that it's hard to get objective feedback on your work. It's really easy to show it to people that love you, and they will love your work. And I want to encourage you right now that that's not bullcrap. Like when you show it to your mom or your sister or somebody that loves you and they read it and they're like, oh my gosh, I love this. Now, probably the story isn't as good as it needs to be published, but they really do love it. Because when they read something that you created, they get to see something of you that they've not seen before. Like sharing a story, sharing anything that you've created, in like an artistic capacity is a vulnerable experience. So like when you allow somebody else to read that is like a real relationship building experience there. I know this is true with my wife. I've been married for 20 years next week, which is cool. And so my wife is writing a book, and my wife is an awesome writer. She's doing a great job writing this book, but nonetheless, she'll show me things that she's read. And like I as the developmental editor brain that I have can see like what's good and what needs to be improved. But there's also this husband part of me that gets like misty eyed no matter what I read, because I'm getting to see something of her that I've never seen before. She's letting me in to a place that I didn't get to go. And there's something about, she's writing a fictional story, but nonetheless, I get to learn something about the way she sees the world, about the way she understands the world to work. And that's a really special thing. In writing and poetry especially, we talk about the unknowable other. That really when it comes down to it, like we are all humans living our own experience on earth, and we really don't know anybody else. Like even if my wife and I, for instance, sat in a room together 24 hours a day for the rest of our lives, we would never get to a place of complete knowing of the other person. And that's something that only Jesus can do. And that's something that's so special about our relationship with him is we want to know Jesus, but we also invite him to know us and to be fully known. And so when we're sharing our work with somebody that we love, we're engaging in a little bit of that. We're saying, I want to be more fully known by you. And so again, I just want to encourage you that when somebody that you love tells you that it's good, but it's really not that good and it still has stuff, it's not because they're trying to like inflate your ego or they're trying to push you over or something like that. Genuinely, like when you have that experience with somebody, it's a special thing. Nonetheless, as aspiring professional writers, like the people who submitted to this are, we also need that objective feedback, right? Because when you put your book or your story out to the market, you don't get to stand over somebody's shoulder and tell them all the things that you meant to say, right? And also, like when I publish the Novel Matrix and somebody finds it on Amazon or they buy it at a bookstore or whatever, I don't get any credit for who I am. I don't get any credit because I've been nice to them before or because I've been mean to them before or anything. That work itself just has to stand alone. And so that's what we're here to do tonight, is to provide that counterpoint to the feedback that you can get from your friends and family, to provide real market feedback. Like if you publish this story today, this is what you could expect to happen. This is how you could expect this story to be reviewed. This is why you may or may not find the kind of opportunities that you want. And we're in a special position to do that because we've studied it. Not necessarily in a formal capacity, but we spent a lot of time in the industry and working with stories to come to a place where we can connect the dots between the audience that you want and what you've written and help you to find the missing link there. So that's what we are here to do tonight. Alli, anything to add to that?
No, I thought that was very, very well put.
All right, excellent. Well, let's get started then. I just want to go in the order that I happen to have them on my clipboard.
Great.
Which is probably also the order that they are on the website. Again, go download these if you haven't yet. Read them, critique them before you get started. It's going to be a much more valuable experience if you participate in that way. Writers.company, and then just Google or use the search bar to look for ProCritique, and it's going to be what comes up. You will need a free account to access it. That just protects the authors so that we're not putting their stories out to the whole world. But go create the free account, grab the stories, download them, read them, and then let's dig in. So, Alli, will you introduce us to Werewolves, A Werewolf's Will by Nathan Casey?
Absolutely.
Cool.
He could feel the longing deep in his bones. Every night it was present, but stronger when the moonlight shone upon him. As of yet, he had never stepped outside with a bright, shining moon. Mostly because of practicality. A long job starting at sunrise did not accommodate for late nights, but a small part of him also resisted going outside, simply to show he had the willpower to not give in to that longing.
Thank you, Alli. And so this is by Nathan Casey, and am I correct in that this was written as part of the Spring Writing Challenge?
It was.
What was the prompt?
The prompt, that's such a good question. I should know that, as I did the Spring Writing Challenge.
You hold the most expertise on the Spring
do.
Writing Challenge of anyone in the entire world. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Okay,
I'm just totally blanking on it.
That's all right. But it was written for the Spring Writing Challenge, which had a word count limit of 1,000 words. Could have been the Secret Garden. Thanks, Camila, in the chat there. There's not really a Secret Garden in there, though. So I don't know. But I thought...
It could be the last one, which was Rebirth.
Oh, yeah, it could be that one.
That's what I'm thinking.
But that notwithstanding, not really relevant. So we're going to evaluate this, even though it's written for the Spring Writing Challenge, as if, it's a short story that you're submitting to, any publication in the world, including The Pearl, which is a great place to submit your work. That's the magazine that our apprentices run, which you can find at pearlmag.co. But there is a 1,000 word count limit on this, so we'll be considerate of that. So, Alli, why don't you get us started? What do you see here?
Yeah, so right off the bat, I love the werewolf, right? I thought it was, I love the idea of the werewolf, but I found a lot of the transitions to be quite confusing as we go through the story. I'm not really sure where the present of the story is, where we are in time.
And what do you mean by story present?
Like what's actually taking place. Because in this story, we kind of go back in time as he remembers different things, and I'm not sure presently where we are in the story. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So what's the active thread through the story?
Right.
And it's interesting that you said that you love the werewolf. Because if I didn't have the title, which is A Werewolf's Will, I don't know that I would have put together that he is a werewolf.
Oh.
It never becomes explicit anywhere that we're dealing with the werewolf. Now, we could kind of put together, this attraction to the moonlight and some of the things that are said about nighttime. And I like some of the showing details, like on the first page, it says, he froze. Why were his boots on? Quickly he unlaced them and put them back where they belonged. Yeah. I think there's some really good stuff in there that shows me that something suspicious and kind of supernatural could be happening. But it was difficult, again, without the title, to fully make that connection and see clarity and resolution to what's happening in the story for me.
Yeah, I can totally see that. Now that you say it, I just got swept up in the title.
And that's fair. That's a debatable subject of how much the title should count for what happens in the story. Because obviously when we encounter the story, we consume it with the title. So it's certainly present there. Part of what tripped me up through the story is there's a lot of telling. There's a lot of explaining that's happening here. So really the first couple of paragraphs, what you read, there's some nice turns of phrase in there, but at the same time, it's just a lot of information. Like you said, there's nothing present in the moment of the story that is really happening. We're getting a lot of information. A lot of things are being explained to us about the premise of the story. And in fact, if we cut the first two paragraphs there, the story becomes a lot stronger. And also the fourth paragraph. So it would go like this. It would begin, the moon was out early tonight, and there were no clouds to block the moon's perfectly circular pattern, but he was already going to get less sleep than on other nights. That's a more effective opening because it centers us on a particular moment in time. It opens up some story gaps, as in it makes us ask some questions about what's happening, which compels us to continue reading. But more than anything else, we get rid of all that explaining, all that telling that's happening, and we just get to some data. We get to some facts that we can see about the story. And then your reader, who is really smart, can put together the pieces and begin to ask questions about who this character is and why these factors are true in their life.
Definitely, yeah.
And so again, there are places that you do that really well, like that first line, "The moon was out early tonight." That's a really cool line right there. And then later, I mentioned the thing with the boots, and then on the second page, "The moon was lower now, its rays peeking through the window and onto the floor in a crisp shadow." So there you're giving me real imagery that I can connect with, and I would like to see you get to that a lot more expediently. Also, considering your word count, you spend a lot of words explaining things that you don't need to. If you would just cut to the action and the sensory data, the imagery, that I can explore and be a part of, if you would just cut to that, you're going to get to the meat of your story a lot faster, which is going to give you more time to bring it to what feels like a more satisfactory resolution, where there's like this aha moment where we really get it. And for this story in particular, I think the natural aha is where we fully realize that, oh, he is a werewolf.
Right.
We're getting all of these sort of loose details about the moon and his attraction to that nighttime, and nighttime is sort of attractive, but also sort of scary for him for some reason. If you're focusing on the imagery, that's what's going to come across. But then, boom, somewhere we realize who he is and what he is and the implications of that for his life. And that's going to be a more satisfactory resolution to the story.
Yeah, I agree with that.
You have any other thoughts on this one?
Good question. I will say I loved a lot of the, like you were saying, like the imagery and stuff in the beginning. I felt like it got too much by the end of the story, and I got confused and didn't really know what was going on.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those stories where, and sometimes this can work, especially with a very, very short story like this one, where it's almost more like a vignette, but we don't have a clear direction for the story. We don't really know what the character is doing, what he hopes to accomplish, and so we don't really know whether to root for him. Like, I don't know if I should root for him to stay in the house or go outside.
I kind of wanted to see him go outside.
That seemed like it would be interesting. I wanted to see the
werewolf, but maybe that's just me.
Yeah. No, I think we all wanted to see the werewolf, right? Or at least get that resolution to the story. Cool. Well, thank you for sharing that with us, Nathan. Let's move on to the next one, which I think is Kamryn. All right. So you want to introduce that story for us? What's the title of it?
That is a good question. I don't have the title on the paper.
All right.
I should have been prepared for that.
But it's the one by Kamryn Weaver on the website, right? All right, cool.
This was also a spring writing challenge.
Okay.
Max swore under his breath. That was the fourth branch that had slapped him across the face. "How much farther, Fitz?" he huffed. They'd been trudging along for an hour now.
Cool. Thank you, Alli. And we typically read a couple of lines just to give everybody a chance to catch up. And the title of this story is "I Just Got Here." And for this one, it was the Spring Writing Challenge. The prompt was that you had to include this dialogue where somebody says, if you know something bad is going to happen, do you have to try and stop it? And then somebody responds, "I just got here." And so we see that on the second page there. So here, I think, there's some interesting pieces of the story. It feels vaguely factual in a way, that's kind of interesting. Like, I feel like maybe I'm learning something about, World War II, Nazi Germany in there, but I'm not sure. And parts of it feel a little bit stereotypical, right? Of just like other things I've seen about Nazi Germany. And so I wasn't sure if I was learning new things or if I'm just kind of getting some stuff regurgitated to me.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was real confused in the beginning of this story, what was happening and where they were and what was going on. It wasn't until I read it through about half of it and then started over again that I could really picture what was happening in the story.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And really, in place of like good setting development, we have a lot of premise development.
Yeah.
So we're getting a lot of details about like those historical things, like things about Hitler's youth and, the little German women or whatever they're called, and, the Gestapo and things like that. We're getting a lot of factual type information on the page as we go through, but we're not getting as much setting as I would like. And so really, I think that this story would be much stronger if we scale back, like trying to convey so much information, trying to teach so much, and instead just provide a really strong setting, really strong imagery that that your reader can jump into, and we sort of get lost in our imagination. And then once we're there, then you can move us forward into what's really important to you to tell us.
Absolutely.
And there's this experience that we can all relate to where you're reading and you get lost. Like you forget that you're reading, right? But you're just like in your imagination and you're reading the words on the page, of course, but there's just something almost really cool, almost feels magical that's happening between you and the text. And the information in here really prevents us from getting to that place. You know, whenever we encounter a fact that feels like there's information being dumped, it immediately reminds us like, hey, you're reading a story. What you're reading isn't real. Don't get lost in this.
Yeah, absolutely. I also found that there were a lot of lines that were really just telling us what happened instead of showing us. Like an example of that is Max tried to calm his nerves and failed. You know, instead of just telling us that Max tried to calm his nerves and failed, I want to see him, like, what action is he taking to calm his nerves? Is he taking deep breaths? Is he, like, squeezing his hands together? And how is he failing? Yeah,
that's a really, really good example right there. And we have to, just like with the last story, we have to rely on the fact that our reader is smart. Right? Like, yeah, we can tell him he tried to calm his nerves and fail, and there's no question that the reader is going to understand the information of the story. But we can also tell him things like, you know, he bit the inside of his lip too hard and until he could taste blood, and then he stopped. And that he like picked at his fingernails compulsively, one side and then the other. We can tell them details like that and then trust that they are smart enough they've either done that or they know somebody that does that, or they just, you know, can intuit what's happening. And they're going to arrive at that conclusion that Max is trying to calm his nerves but is not going very well. And that conclusion that they reach is going to be so much stronger because they got to participate in it. And the other piece of that is when we let them reach the conclusion, they're going to reach a much more specific and nuanced idea of what's happening than you can tell them. Like you can tell them that he tried to calm his nerves and failed. Again, we understand that informationally, but when you describe those actions, you give us that imagery and the action of the story and then allow us to interpret it, we're going to arrive at a micro idea of that, right? Like something that's really specific, and it wouldn't be the same. Like Alli and I would read the same story and we're going to arrive at a little bit different conclusion based on our experiences that we're bringing to the story. But our relationship to the story is going to be so much stronger. Our relationship to the characters is going to be so much stronger because you allowed us to reach our conclusion rather than just feeding it to us.
Yeah, I mean, even just now we came up with 2 completely different ways to calm your nerves.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. Cool. What else did you see?
I know that this was part of the spring writing challenge, but I really felt like there was pieces of the story missing. You know, that there was more that wasn't, you know, not included on purpose, but didn't make it to the page. Now that could have been how it was formatted, for sure. Like there's some weird formatting going on with this particular piece, but it felt like I was missing key details about who the characters were, what was going on, and what was going on around them. Yeah, I think that's really valid. And really, from a story arc perspective, we have a lot of beginning here. We got a lot of premise building where sort of the situation's being explained to us. We have a middle section where he arrives, and you know, there's sort of this sizing up that's happening. But the ending is kind of weak. Right, he's gonna get the pin, but it feels hasty. It feels like, well, let's just throw in something to wrap this up. And I know that's challenging when you're working with 1,000 words, and it sometimes that happens. That's why it was called a challenge.
But again, I think your focus here is to save words on your premise building. Like just drop us in and get started already. And then you have more word count available at the end to do that. Yeah. And one of the best ways to do that is to identify the moment of the story. So I have a YouTube video about this on my YouTube page, youtube.com/Brad Pauquette, about the moment of the story. So I encourage you to check that out. But basically we're asking the question, what's the moment that everything changes? And here, I'm not sure yet. Yeah. I think we have a story that doesn't really have a moment. There's not one moment that we can point to and say, yep, that's the clincher right there. That's what's going on. And without knowing what that is, it's difficult to arrange the pieces of the story around it. And so it's really natural in the drafting process that you're just going to write a story like this, right? You're just inspired. You just go with it. But at the end, then, you got to look through and say, okay, now that it's out there, what is the moment of the story? What's the most important point here where something dramatically changes? And if you don't find a moment, well, then you need to insert one somewhere. If you find multiple moments, you need to decide which one is really the important one. And then you can turn the story on that, and you can place that moment at the beginning, the middle, or the end, but you got to know what it is. And then you're either showing us how we get there or what happens after this big change occurs in somebody.
Definitely.
Any other notes on this?
I don't think so.
I just have one other note. And as I'm reading this, I found it sort of unbelievable that Max was taking Fitz, or I'm sorry, whichever character was taking the other character to the secret hideout to vet him, right? Like if I had a secret hideout, I wouldn't bring people there to vet them. I would vet them somewhere else.
Especially in Nazi Germany.
Right. And then after we decided they were good to go, then I would bring them to the secret hideout to meet everybody. And that's a small thing, but from a believability standpoint, it stood out to me.
That's a good catch.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you, Kamryn, for sharing with us. I appreciate it. Let's move on to the next story, which begins Cassie Ella Teague. Who's that by?
That is by Camila.
All right. Camila, thanks for submitting. Do you want to introduce the story to us?
Yes. Cassia Ella
Teague, I would assume.
Teague? You better have a good explanation as to why France can't stop gawking at you with his nose all scrunched up. Cassie laughed, examining her beloved chocolate lab, who indeed had his nose gathered tightly at the tip of his snout, wiggling around. I just went out. He probably just smells everything.
Cool. Thank you, Allie. All right. So what we have here is the first chapter of a manuscript. So we're going to evaluate it from that standpoint that, this would be the first chapter of a book that we're reading. So Allie, why don't you get started on this one? What do you think?
This one, I had a little bit of a trouble placing kind of what the point of the story was, so it kind of felt like to me, like we start with this dialogue between a mom and her daughter, and I'm not really sure where they are. I'm not really sure what's going on with it. And then we transition and I'm like, okay, so the mom has food, she has dinner ready. And then it turns into she's at the beach, I think. I was really confused locationally where they were through the story.
Yeah, I agree with that. From page 2, at the end of page 2, she's going to call her friend Luke, and she picks up this weird note. You don't belong with them. But then the next page, we seem to be on the beach, and he's using a name that we haven't been exposed to before.
Yeah.
And so I'm suddenly wondering, well, is there a third person there?
Right.
And later at the end of the page, it's explained that he's calling her by his middle name, that it's like maybe, I'm guessing sort of like a flirty thing.
Yeah.
That he's doing.
There were flirty vibes between the two of them.
But maybe not flirty. It's possible, they're just buddies as well. But we don't learn that until the end of the page. And so, yeah, I'm pretty confused on page 3, where we are. I thought she was making a phone call to Luke. That's what I was expecting.
Yeah.
And so when Luke has dialogue next, I'm expecting that they're on the phone.
Yeah. After reading it, I think a third time, it reminded me of, in TV shows where a character's like thinking of something and then it cuts and they're in the same position, but the scene behind them is different.
Yeah.
That's what I felt like was trying to happen here, but we don't have any of the setting or the location to actually pull that across.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so on page 3 there, we really just need the author to take the time to establish the scene again, right there. Let us know where we are. Some simple stuff like, can you give us clues what time of day it is? Is this a continuation of what's happened before, or are we in a flashback? We need all those kind of details in order to move forward.
Definitely. I also found, maybe this is just a personal pet peeve of mine, but when we start with dialogue, that really sets us up for a lot of confusion of where things are. When we don't start with a description or a setting or something that pulls us into the story, but with dialogue specifically, I always kind of find that to be difficult to figure out where we are in the story.
Yeah, and I think there are exceptions to that, but there's this rule: don't start your story with dialogue, and it's actually a pretty good rule. Now, not 100%. There are ways to do it well, but the reason behind that rule is when you start with dialogue, we don't know where we are and we don't know who's talking. So when I read that first line, I do voices in my head. I don't think everybody does that. I don't think my wife
Maybe
does.
you do belong at Role Makers, Brad.
But I do voices in my head, and I don't know what voice to read that first line in. So I very much know that I'm just guessing, that I'm just kind of like going along and hoping that it resolves in my mind soon. And so this is a good example of why that rule is in effect. So like Alli said, I would love to get pulled into a setting right off the bat, for you to like weave me into the place and the time first, and then we can get rolling on the story.
Definitely. I love the idea of the manta ray and there being something magical. I found there was something magical going on with the manta ray
Seems so.
at the end of the story. But it really came out of left field for me. You know, it felt like we were reading a contemporary in the beginning about a girl dealing with the grief of the loss of her sister and her dad. And then suddenly it was a magical story where she's having this like moment with, I think it's a manta ray at the end.
Yeah.
And that it made me feel like I was reading two different stories at that point.
Yeah, I agree with you. And sort of, you know, as a first chapter, as I'm reading it, I don't know how the scenes fit together. And I'm very intrigued by the end of the chapter here. Like when this magical thing starts happening and she punches her friend and she runs and dives into the water inexplicably. I'm interested in that. You intrigue me there. But as I'm wading through the first two scenes there, and even as I reflect back on them, I don't know why those are included. They really don't establish enough for the amount of word count. Like, basically, we established dead dad, dead sister.
Yeah.
And they live near the ocean. And so we've got, 4 pages to establish a couple of really simple facts when I want to get to the action of the story. I want to know what kind of story I'm reading.
Exactly. I agree with that.
And so, like Alli mentioned, there were some confusing places, mostly related to that transition where I don't know where they are. And so I'm mostly spending page 3 just trying to get my bearings and figure out where we might be, if they're actually physically together or if they're on the phone, etc. But we also have some instances of telling. So you use a common construction. I'm just going to give 2 examples from page 1 here. But at the end of page 1, you have Cassie went on unconvinced. Then 2 lines later, Cassie took a bite of her meal, wishing to change the subject. So those are 2 places where you, like we talked about with the last piece, you're delivering an inference, you're delivering a conclusion to me rather than showing me something that allows me to reach the same conclusion. So rather than Cassie went on unconvinced, I want you to think about how a third-party observer would determine that Cassie is unconvinced.
Yeah.
Is it her tone of voice? Is it her facial expression? Is it her body language? Is it something else going on in the environment that would lead you to draw the conclusion that she's unconvinced? And then rather than telling me unconvinced, share something that share that data with me. Share her body language or her facial expression, her tone of voice, whatever else is going on in the environment. And when you do that, you're going to accomplish 2 things. One, you're going to give us that more immersive experience like we talked about with the last piece. But secondly, you're going to be building the scene and the characters at the same time. So now not only do I know that Cassie is unconvinced, but because of the way you've described it, I now know that she has brown hair. Or that she's tall or short, or that their house is kind of dumpy, or it's really nice, or whatever the detail that you choose to share builds the scene in addition to clarifying the emotional status right there.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So the next line, let's just run this as an example, Alli.
Okay.
So put your thinking cap on.
Okay.
All right. Cassie took a bite of her meal, wishing to change the subject. Tell me something about Dad. So what would you do with that?
Okay, my first instinct would be her eyes trail off to the side to the mantelpiece where there's a picture of their family.
Yeah, that's good.
And then she would say, so tell me about Dad.
Yeah, and that's going to provide some information that'll save you later, where you don't have to get as explicit and information-y about the dead dad and dead sister.
Yeah.
And the other thing is right here, you don't have to tell us that at all. It's kind of a trick question, although that's a good example.
Thank you.
But she changes the subject, right? Without that right, Cassie took a bite of her meal. Tell me something about Dad. She very clearly just changed the subject there. So you don't need to tell us that she wants to change the subject. Just show us that she did, in fact, change the subject. And again, we have to believe that our readers are pretty perceptive, and they really are. And they want to participate in your story that way. So when you show them stuff like that, they're going to be like, oh, she's being evasive.
Yeah,
or she's
why?
being snotty a little bit or something,
Yeah.
And again, they're going to bring their own experience about teenage girls to the piece and understand it in a particular nuanced way, but it'll be much stronger than what you can tell them in that.
Absolutely.
Let's see. I'm going to look. Did you have other notes, Allie?
Good question. I noticed a lot of dialogue in this story, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, especially because I do believe the target audience is for like young teen girls. But with so much dialogue, and this goes back into like the setting and stuff, we don't have the time or the room to describe the setting. I think a lot of the dialogue could be cut down and more information could be given to the reader.
Yeah, I think that's good. And, we engage with dialogue, I think, for one of two reasons. There might be more, but there are two reasons I can think of off the bat that we engage with dialogue. One is that the banter is really witty. Like what they're saying is really interesting, really clever, really funny, something like that. The second reason, and the bigger reason, in my opinion, in both stories and real life that we engage with dialogue is because we care about the person who's saying it, right? We find them interesting, or we love them, or whatever, but we're fascinated by the person, and so we're willing to hear what they have to say. We first have to value the person, though. And what we have here, we don't yet have that value for the characters, and the dialogue isn't particularly witty. It's not giving me a lot that I'm like, oh, that was so good. It's just such a good line that keeps me magnetized to the story. And so I need to fall in love with the characters a little bit first before I can really do this much back and forth dialogue. And that wouldn't take a lot, but like right now we have a better description of the dog, who is never important again to the chapter, than we do of any particular character in the story. And so I would love to get to know them a little bit first, value them, love them, and then I'll care more about the conversation that they're having.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So one of the tests that we run on a first chapter, there are two. The first one is, do you know what story you're reading by the end of the first chapter here?
I don't. Not really. Like I said, it felt like a contemporary or a fantasy.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like both.
Yeah, I agree. And again, I'm intrigued at the end. Like
Definitely.
you were getting my attention there at the end, but most of the first chapter didn't seem to match the genre and tropes that you bring in suddenly at the end of the chapter. The second question we ask is, if you pick this up at a bookstore and you sat down, you read the first chapter, deciding to buy it, do you have to keep reading, or does it go back on the shelf?
I think it would go back on the shelf mostly just because I'm confused.
Yeah. And right now I would agree with that. For all the reasons that we've discussed, I need more, and I need to get there faster in order to really get engrossed in the story, where it's like, man, I'll pay you any amount of money if you just let me read chapter 2 on this.
Right.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you, Camila. I hope that you continue to work with this, because again, I am very interested in the premise and where you're going with it.
I want to know about the manta rays.
Yeah. All right. Well, lastly tonight, we have a piece by Ava Travis, which is another first chapter. So, Allie, would you mind introducing us to that one?
Piper wasn't the smiling type to begin with, and at the moment, she felt like doing anything but smiling. 5 minutes, just 5 more minutes. Piper pressed her forehead against the wall of the middle school girls' restroom. Don't throw up.
Cool. Thank you, Allie. Okay, so here again, we have a first chapter. And so we're going to evaluate it with that context. And there's a lot that I really like about this first chapter. I like that you're taking a subject that could be sort of like blasé and boring, but you're making it interesting because of who the character is. Like, I'm getting to know the character, and so I begin to care as much about middle school violin as she does, right? Even though, I don't have any relationship to middle school violin.
You're not into middle school violin,
my
Brad?
son actually is like in the 7th grade and plays violin, so perhaps I should have more empathy for the situation. But no, like, you're introducing me to Piper. I'm getting a sense of who she is, primarily through showing type details, and because of that, I'm willing to get on board and see this situation through.
Definitely.
So what did you find, Allie?
I agree with a lot of what you said. Like, I found the story to be, it really pulled me in, and I was really like, you learn a lot about the character based on what she says other characters are saying about her life, which I thought was an interesting detail. Like her teacher saying that like this was everything. So you know that she believes this is everything, even though she doesn't necessarily say herself, I believe this is everything.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that's a good example of showing, because it brings more complexity, right? Like you could just provide this information. She knew that this was everything. However, we have a lot more to think about if we hear that her teacher said that this was everything, and we see her sort of like noodling on that, right?
Yeah.
And deciding if she's going to believe it or not. And we have to, based on the context and the subtext of what's happening, we have to decide if we think that she's actually on board with this, to what level she's buying it or not.
Definitely.
And I think you're right there.
I think that we do lose some of that by the end of the story, though.
Yeah.
By the last 2 pages, I'm left wondering a lot more about what she's thinking about her mom and the migraines and the headaches, and we don't really get a lot of that on the paper.
Okay. What would you suggest for that?
Good question. I'm so glad you asked that.
I thought you would be.
You know,
You know what? I'm going to let you think about that for just a second. So, again, I think generally the treatment of the subject material is well executed, and there's a lot of good there. However, it could be a lot tighter. So there are a number of lines that, we could just eliminate the line, move us through the content a little bit faster, and we're really not going to lose anything. In fact, we're going to make the story stronger. Great example is the first line. Piper wasn't the smiling type to begin with, and at that moment, she felt like doing anything but smiling. There's a good principle. I won't even call it a rule. That would be too strong, but avoid telling me what a character's not doing. Instead, tell me what they are doing. And so this first line that we have here tells me something that she's not doing. It really doesn't bring a lot of context or subtext to the scene itself. So we could cut that line entirely. And then if we go down to the fourth indent, and Piper was terrified of having nothing to live for. That's a telling sentiment there. You're just sharing this information with me. And the irony is that you've already shown me that. I can see that from the previous paragraph, but violin was all she had. It was all she was good at. It was all she lived for. Like, we are so close to Piper in this. It feels like a first person story. Like it feels like Piper is telling the story. Feels like all the emotions that we're getting, all the editorializing we're getting are coming from Piper, even though it's a third person story, which is a great technique to use. And so that allows those lines, even though that's technically telling, like it was all she was good at, it was all she lived for, that's technically telling, but because we're so close to her, we're allowed to hear her thoughts, and those feel like they are her thoughts, even though they're not internal dialogue. But because they're her thoughts, I'm already arriving at this conclusion that she's like real stressed out, right? And she doesn't know how she feels about this, and she has a lot of different influences weighing on her, and so you don't need to explicitly state it later on. I'll just give one more example, but there are many throughout. Later on in the page, this paragraph, she played Be Thou My Vision. It was her favorite song, lovely, rich, aching with beauty. Piper closed her eyes and lost herself in the haunting notes. I love that right there. That works. But then the next line, she loved violin, of course. Why was she so afraid? Again, there, you're rehashing things that you already showed me. I'm on board. You got me. Right? Again, your readers are smart. They figure stuff out. And already your reader has a more nuanced and deeper understanding of that than you could possibly state in those lines. And so when you rehash it, it sort of trivializes it a little bit, and it draws us out of the story.
Definitely.
What else did you see?
Well, I'll answer your question now.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what I would do is I would do a little bit of a callback to in the first paragraph or first couple paragraphs, we see that she has this teacher that's saying that like violin is everything, right? What I would do is I would pull back in the last couple pages and I would go further into her mom's relationship with violin and how that is pulling into conflict her own relationship with violin to bring more depth to the page.
That's a good idea. Yeah. And you could even... I think the risk there would that it become a little bit on the nose and a little bit synchronous, right? If everything relates back to violin.
Right.
But I think you could make that work, but you could also just like tie back to mom's feelings about talent and passion.
Yeah.
Right. Like just to give it more stakes, to kind of give the relationships a little bit more teeth. Like we see that dad is very supportive, right?
Yeah.
That's his role in the relationship is he's the guy that's going to be there no matter what. So I'd love to just get a feeling that like that the stakes are coming from something other than just her own high performance, you know?
Right.
And parents, even loving parents, can sometimes do that to their kids.
Right.
Right. Like yeah.
Is her mom a perfectionist as well? And is that where she learned it from?
Yeah, exactly.
Things like that.
Or has her mom made little comments, unintentionally even, but that she's internalized and feels that she really has to be the prodigy, that she has to perform and fulfill, be a good steward, right? That's
Right.
language that can bite us in the butt sometimes. Be a good steward of this prodigious talent that she has. But what, something to bring a little bit more depth and complexity there would be great. This is a small note. This is my personal preference. I think we've talked about this before, Alli, but I personally do not like the construction "said dad," "asked dad," because in any other
dad?
right. In any other situation, we would go subject verb. Right, we would say dad said, dad asked, mom said,
Right.
mom asked. But for some reason, we've developed this really weird exception for said and other dialogue verbs where we allow the verb to go first. And we would never be like, ran Alli.
Yeah.
We would never say anything, right? Like cooked Alli food.
Yeah.
Like we would never say that. And so I always stumble over it a little bit. And it's not a big deal. Again, lots of authors do it. So I can't cry too hard, but it is a personal pet peeve of mine. I wish we would just go with the simpler construction. I think it's easier to read.
Yeah, I agree with that. It helps with the flow of the story too.
Yeah. And I think probably my last note, unless you say something really interesting that I have to riff off of, is be careful with the telling language. So again, like I was saying a moment ago, you get a license to do that because we're so close to the character, that it feels like a first person piece, and therefore you are allowed to tell us things that she feels. Just like if I was explaining my life to you, I'm allowed to say I had a good day, I had a bad day, I felt sad, I felt happy, whatever. You're allowed to say that. However, you got to be really careful with that. You gotta hold that really carefully. And so there are a few places that you're going overboard with the telling, and when in doubt, dial it back in. Focus on the showing. Let your reader see the data, see the imagery of what's happening, what the space is like, body language, facial expression, tone of voice, those kinds of things. Let us see that, and then we'll put the pieces together, and we're really good at that. So whenever you're on the fence of like, is this too telly? Get rid of it. Get rid of it and show me something about the scene. And you're going to achieve that dual effect that we were talking about earlier, where we're going to arrive at the same conclusion as far as the emotions, but also you're going to be effectively building the scene as you do that. So I'm going to give a couple additional examples of that, and I'll go to the last page just to make it easy. So on the last page, third paragraph down, Dad clearly didn't understand. Well, if it's clear, why do you have to tell me? Right? If it's clear to her, it should be clear to me because, again, you've provided enough information on the page, which you have, so that I've already arrived at that conclusion that, I see that Dad is supportive, but he's also just not getting it. And that's a great complexity to have, but so you don't need to state it explicitly there. And then the last line there, Piper grabbed her violin case and walked off to her room. We really don't need that line there. It's much stronger if we just end with the line of dialogue above that. And really, this is a great rule to apply to whatever stories. I find that as a developmental editor, it is so common for me to cross out the first line or the first paragraph and the last line or the last paragraph. Because oftentimes in the first line, we're establishing premise or something that we don't really need to. We just need to jump in already. And in the last line, a lot of times we're like kind of wrapping something up that doesn't need to be wrapped up. Just cut it, cut it while it's hot and walk away. And that's going to be more effective for you. Did you have any other notes, Alli?
I did not. Nothing for you to riff off of now.
All right. Well, thank you, Ava, for sharing it with us. Thank you for Ava and Camila and Kamryn and Nathan. You guys are awesome. I'm really happy that you would choose to participate in this way. Again, put yourself out there. And I just want to reiterate, I know that we primarily give bad critique. We're critical of the piece.
I'd say we give really good critique.
We give good, bad critique.
Critical.
But don't let that discourage you, right? That's the role that you've invited us into, is to tell you the things that could be made better about this piece. That doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of wonderful things that already are in the piece. And we try to highlight some of those as we go. But again, you send it to us and ask us to find problems. So that's our primary role here.
Yeah.
So again, I applaud you that you finished something and you took the risk to vulnerably share it with other people. Like, awesome. Great job. You are already like miles ahead of some of your peers because you're willing to do those two things. So thank you so much for sharing it. And I hope that you take this feedback and now apply it. The book of James in the Bible says, don't just be hearers of the word, but be doers of the word. And now this is certainly not the gospel that we've shared with you tonight, but nonetheless, it only does you so much good to just hear the critique. But now it's up to you to take the critique and apply it. And that's really where you're going to internalize it and improve, is by taking the words that we've said, listening to it again in the recording, and now doing your best to apply it and practice it. And that's how you're going to ingrain better habits as a writer and improve your skills so that you just naturally do this stuff in the future and you don't even have to think about it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Cool. Well, let's pray. And thank you for joining us tonight. So please join me in prayer. Lord Jesus, I thank you so much for each person that's come to the meeting tonight and everybody that submitted their stuff for consideration and for critique. Lord, I ask that you would really bless those guys that we couldn't include in the critique tonight. There's people that submitted, but just for time's sake, we weren't able to put in the stack. Lord, I ask that you bless them. I ask that you provide opportunities for them to get that feedback. And I just commend their vulnerability, Lord, in that. So we thank you for your hand upon them. Lord, I ask that you would bless these 4 authors that submitted their work and allowed us to critique it and allowed us to do that publicly for the benefit of other people. I thank you for them. God, I just ask that you would reward that in their writing, that you would be a part of what they're doing and how they're doing it. So I thank you, Jesus. I thank you that you desire to be a part of everyone's writing, whether we submit it or not. And Lord, I pray that your blessing would fall upon us. Everybody who listens, whether it's today or in the future in the recording, I ask that your blessing would fall on us. Lord, that we would experience something of you when we write. Lord, that you would put little reminders in our lives and people around us that remind us and support us, and that we would just honor you in everything that we do and invite you into every piece of our work. So I thank you, Jesus. I thank you for all these things. I thank you for your blessings and your love for us. And we praise your name. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us for the July ProCritique. Please check out the website, writers.company/events. Will take you to all future events, including ProCritiques. But I also want to share with you about our live coaching groups, which we just started. So these are small groups and they are topic oriented. So for instance, we have a group on drafting and revising. So if you are drafting or revising a manuscript, come to this group. It's a small group, going to be around 10 people or fewer is our target. And you get personalized feedback from people with expertise and experience that can help you to stay accountable to your own goals and reach the objectives that you set for yourself. So I think that's going to be a super helpful resource for lots of people. I'd love for you to take part in it. So again, check out writers.company for that, but also for other opportunities and things that we've got going on. Looking forward to the fall when our schedules kind of stabilize and, we'll have another writing contest and other things coming up. So we hope that you'll be a part of that soon. So thank you for joining Alli and I. We appreciate your time and bless you guys. Thank you so much for listening today. Please be sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen and leave us a review. This podcast was produced by Theo Pauquette with help from the company. For help with your podcast, visit writers.company. We'd love to give you a hand.